Depending on what time you are listening to this YouTube video, we have a very special episode today. My name's Knial Piper, and this is the Obscure Book Report. I am the author of Freedom Blues and American Soul. That's my first novel. It came out last year, 2017, June 2nd. I encourage you to go out and get that. Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. And after the show, we will be covering the demonic virtue. Do we have a picture of the demonic virtue? We'll be doing an audio version of it after this, and you can catch chapter 4 this Sunday. All right. This week, we're doing the Necronomicon. This is an intense book, the Necronomicon. So, people say this book is bound in human leather, like human skin. I think we even have a picture of what that looks like. It's called anthropodermic bibliology. There are books that are bound in human skin. That's what it looks like. They have 47 books they believe to have the claim of bound in human skin. The Necronomicon is one of those. 30 of those have been confirmed. Those include James Allen and William Burke. Those are criminals who, for some reason or another, had their skin torn off after they were killed, execution, and then their stories were bound in their own skin. The Necronomicon is supposedly one of these books. Let's learn a little more about the Necronomicon. All right, on the Obscure Book Report, we're talking about the Necronomicon. Who wrote the Necronomicon? We're talking about the Mad Arab, also known as Abdul al-Sared. That's kind of a depiction of what he supposedly looked like. We obviously don't have any pictures of him because this took place in and around 730, like 730 AD. And he was a person from Sinai, and he was traveling through Babylon at the time when he came upon this revelation of these otherworldly creatures. And he wrote this down, and we'll go into this, but whenever he wrote this down, the creatures, or the ancient ones, the elder ones, didn't want him to write this down. This is a city of the nameless city that he supposedly discovered underneath Iram, near the ancient city of Memphis, which, if still around today, would be one of the oldest cities, older than Damascus. Well, he dies mysteriously in 738 after writing this book. He calls the book Al-Azif. Al-Azif, what does that mean? Al-Azif means Beelzebub's singing sand. This is the noises people would hear in the desert. It was the insects, but they believed it to be demons singing or whispering, and he named the book after that, Al-Azif. The first part, he talks about the Mad Arab. He talks about how he came upon this book, and the book was ultimately written down, and it was passed from philosopher to philosopher, and Theodorus Philetus in 950 was the first person to translate the book into Greek. Years of experimentation caused some sick things to happen, and it was ultimately burned by the Patriarch Michael in 1050. So about 100 years of experimentation with this book proved that we needed to burn the fuck out of this book. It's an evil thing, the Necronomicon. Well, Aulus Warmius of 1228 gets a hold of the book, and he translates it. He translates it from Greek to Latin, the primary language at the time. And then Pope Gregory IX heard about this, and he banned the book completely. He said, we need to keep this thing out of the public limelight. We need to just do away with it altogether. There's a picture of the Pope, and this is actually depicted as a picture around the time whenever he banned the book. I'm not sure if that's the book in his hand, but yeah, he said, no way, keep this shit out of the limelight. Well, up until about the 17th century, we see multiple versions of this book come out. It's translated into Spanish, Italian, German, you name it. The book is starting to bloom everywhere. And the Elizabethan magician, Dr. John Dee, he comes out and translates it to English. There are only fragments of this that still exist. But we have those fragments, and I'll talk about that. The rest were lost over time. There is a copy of this English version from the original manuscript that was pieced together from those fragments that appeared in San Francisco in the 20th century. There's also a version that supposedly appeared in 1692, around the same time that the Salem witch trials happened. So I'm not sure what's up with that. But the versions that do exist are currently being held, or supposedly being held, at the British Museum, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and the Widener Library of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Also in Massachusetts at the Library of the Miskatonic University in Akron. And finally, there's supposedly one at the University of Buenos Aires. I did my research, I tried to find these, and here's what I came up with. We went over the history. How true is this history? Does it exist? You know, I do my research every week so I can provide a quality program to you. Here's what we got. H.P. Lovecraft first mentions this book in 1922 in his story, The Hound. Spooky story. But he also mentions Al-Zahared, Abdul Al-Zahared, the Mad Arab, in a story a year earlier. It's supposedly said that he wanted to create this background of evil verisimilitude. I had to look up what that word meant, but generally he wanted to say this is this whole background of how this book grew up, and he wanted other authors to put it into their work. So it's this multitude of information being put out, and he tries to keep it accurate. One of those people was Clark Ashton Smith. He put the book into his words, and Robert Bloch and a lot of other big artists of Weird Tales. If you remember the episode I talked about 2 times ago with Weird Tales, they kind of peddle this program and the Necronomicon, and they push it out for everyone. The book literally means an image of the law of the dead. Necronomicon. It broken down in Latin, that's what it means. But a lot of people have disputed this and say, no, H.P. Lovecraft, you don't know what you're talking about. It means the law of the book of the dead. But nevertheless, you get the gist. Someone actually asked H.P. Lovecraft about the veracity of this book. They said his name was Willis Conover. He was a famous radio personality at the time, and he said, how true is this book? What's up with this, H.P. Lovecraft? And he said, as far as the hidden or the terrible and forbidden books, I am forced to say that most of them are purely imaginary. There never was an Abdul Al-Zahared or a Necronomicon, for I invented these names myself, and Robert Bloch and Clark Ashton Smith helped, and Robert E. Howard are responsible for different books that came out surrounding the Necronomicon. As for seriously written black books of this time, he says, in all truth, they don't amount to much. That's why it's more fun to invent mystical works like the Necronomicon and the Book of Ebon, which is a similar book written by Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch. So then, even if you break down Abdul Al-Zahared, his last name means All has read. All has read. He said he came up with that for that reason, and then even if you break it down further, and what does Al-Zahared mean? It means fenced-in person, slave, or hazard. And as far as the traditional way of naming people in the Arabic language, usually it would be the name first, and then the surname, the second name, would be where that person lived, a location. So Al-Zahared is not a real place. This kind of breaks it down, and you know, there's no such thing as the Necronomicon. Well, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about when I decided to mess around with the Necronomicon and the things that happened to me. But let's talk about the people that believe in this book. Even though H.P. Lovecraft said, you know, this book is not true, there's still like some valid accounts of this book doing some creepy shit. In Yale University, there's the Necronomicon, and it has been checked out and failed to return by one Abdul A. Wonder who that could be. In 1972, Oswick produced an indecipherable version of this book in a forbidden, hidden, and silly language, I think, called the Duric language. And the introduction is written by, the famous horror writer, Sprague de Camp. As far as other versions, in 1978, there was another version produced by the English magician, John Dee. Yeah, that's the guy from before, John Dee. And he produced this English version. It came out in 1978, and the translation was created by Robert Turner. And it sticks to the Lovecraftian version, but in response to that, in 1998, there was an attempt to just refute all the evidence of the Necronomicon. Someone said, I'm tired of hearing about this shit. I'm going to write the Necronomicon files. That came out in 1998, and it just disproves everything. But there's a version that was produced in the late 70s, in the late 1970s. It's called the Simon Necronomicon. Why is it called the Simon Necronomicon? Literally, the title, it's the one I showed at the beginning, but literally the title is Necronomicon, and it's by one Simon. Whoever the hell Simon is. There's a picture of it. It is a bestseller. It is the bestseller of all the Necronomicons. 800,000 sold by 2006. God only knows what that number is now. And God only knows what it'll be after this show. I encourage you, as far as books, don't seek this book out. Because some weird shit happened to me because of this book. The Necronomicon came out with some alternate versions that attach onto this, like the spell book, the dark history of the Necronomicon, and the gates of the Necronomicon, just diving more into the Necronomicon files. So we're going to talk about, because you can't really say who this was by, what it looks like, what's inside of it. We're picking the Simon Necronomicon, the popular one, and we're going to dissect it a bit. All right, the book begins with the testimony of the Mad Arab. It begins with Alhazared and his testimony in the prologue, where he says, this book, I came upon it on the Tiamat people who were summoning Cthulhu, you know Cthulhu, and Kingu, and Hurawa. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. But the book details Marduk. Marduk is the Elder One. And the Elder Ones are the good guys, if you can imagine good evil beings from another world. But they get into a fight with the Ancient Ones, and then I think it's, I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, they slew Tiamat, the people that the Tiamat people were worshiping. They slew him, killed him. His death created the universe, the Big Bang. Boom. Well, also, there was another Ancient One. So you got the Elder Ones, the good guys, and the Ancient One, the bad guys, and they're fighting. Eventually, Kingu, one of the Ancient Ones, get cut open, and out of his blood spills the creation of us, humans. All of this is detailed in the book after the prologue, and it talks, it's just your general story about good versus evil, and it's based in real mythology, Generally, if you look at the stories, this is how they go. There's creatures, they fight. Things are happening and they create this and this and that. Eventually, the Ancient Ones are captured. They lose to the Elder Ones, and they are imprisoned below the earth, below this world, and another dimension where they reside. And they're not dead, but they're dreaming, if that makes sense. So, how do we get in contact with these creatures? The book goes into detail about how to summon these creatures. And we're going to do that on this show. We're going to test the veracity of this book. You just need to stick around and see what happens. As far as the end of the book, we're talking about the epilogue where Alhazared comes back and he says, I've been having these premonitions about my death. I should have never wrote this down. I should have never taken these ideas from my dream and my interaction at Irem in the Nameless City, and I should have never put it on paper because they're coming after me. Well, account has it, legend has it, that he was lifted up in the middle of the city and torn apart by invisible beings. Gruesome and grotesque death. That's how he died, supposedly. It's very mysterious, but yeah, I'm gonna tell you about the interaction I had. I'm gonna face my fears, and you're gonna watch. We're gonna test the Necronomicon at the end of the show. But the book features a lot of interesting details. I do think it's an interesting read, but it's evil. It was actually, the book was actually used as courtroom evidence in the murder by Rod Farrell and Glenn Mason. These guys sacrificed a human being in the name of this maybe fictional book, the Necronomicon. And it was used as evidence against them. There's actually a spell in the Necronomicon that calls for the sacrifice of 11 men. I'm not sure if that's the one they were going for, but somebody lost their life because of this book. So, good job, H.P. Lovecraft. It is also featured in pop culture. You probably most notable for Necronomicon Ex Mortis in The Evil Dead. That's a picture of it. The book is kind of like this talking, really in pain looking book that obviously looks like it's a human skin wrapped around the book. The book is also featured in the 9th film of Friday the 13th. Guess which one? Jason Goes to Hell. This book isn't satanic. I think a lot of people are confused about that. This book deals with otherworldly beings from another dimension. It's not satanic. It has nothing to do with Christianity, although it is based a lot on Sumerian mythology. The book was also made into a movie in 1994, of which it details 3 Lovecraftian stories, but it is not necessarily following the book itself. Michael Crichton, he mentions the book in Eaters of the Dead, and then Stephen King in 1987 mentions it in his novel, The Eyes of the Dragon, where he talks about a wizard named Abdul al-Zared, and he has got this book that he uses. He doesn't ever say Necronomicon, but we're all assuming what's going on. We're not dumb. So when I got this book, things were intense. Someone handed me this book in high school. And, as a young kid, you're kind of interested in this stuff. And you say, I'm gonna check this book out. You read it, you're like, it seems kind of silly. Maybe I'll test it out for myself. So I just look in there, and it talks about, waiting until this certain day and etching these things into a rock. And I'm interested. I've never heard of something like this, so I do it. And I wait until the 13th moon, and I say these words it says to say, and nothing happens. Nope, nothing. So I just go to bed. I woke up in the morning. This is true. And I had a cut across my forehead. My floor was covered in water. My TV was cracked in half. All my drawers were pulled out. And every chair I had in the house was flipped upside down. Perhaps I had been drinking too much. But I've never done something like that. This book scared the shit out of me. I took that book and I went out into the forest and I chucked it in the woods. When I got back, I had another copy that was mysteriously sitting on my bed. I burned it. This book scared me for a number of years. The Necronomicon. What do I say about it? Don't seek it out. Stay away. If you read this book, you will go insane. I don't know what's been chasing me for a number of years, but I am plagued by something. It's not good. The Necronomicon. All right, good reads. All right, at the end of the show, you guys can call in. You can call in to 321-405-2476. That's Herald Broadcasting Services. We want to hear what you got to say. You need to comment below. What do you think about the Necronomicon? Good reads. All right. Good reads. The Professor and the Madman. Man, I love this book. The Professor and the Madman. Subtitle, long, says, A Tale of Murder, Insanity, and the Making of the Oxford English Dictionary. That's right. How was the Oxford English Dictionary made? This book talks about it. There was a book at this time. I'll get into that in a second. Also, this book is written by Simon Winchester. Awesome name. And in England, the book is known as The Surgeon of Crowthorne. It's a place where he lived, and the Professor. We're talking about James Murray. No, we're not talking about James Murray from Impractical Jokers. We're talking about that guy, Sir Augustus Henry Murray. James Augustus Henry Murray. So it's not a guy that goes around with 4 buds and do a bunch of pranks on people at shopping malls. This is a dude that was a lexicologist and started the dictionary as we know it. Smart motherfucker. He was the prime editor of the Oxford English Dictionary. And at this point, there was only one dictionary, the Johnson Dictionary. It had 2,449 words in it. You think about, man, how could you write anything? What words were they using? Why hadn't they documented this? Well, that's why they're making this book. Oxford calls this guy up. They call up James Murray and they say, sir, we need you to come in and we are going to write this book, and it's going to detail every word we can find. And here's how we want you to do it. They say, crowdsource. Go let everyone know and say, send in all your citations. We want to develop the Oxford English Dictionary. And it worked. People wrote on a ton of slips. They said every word they know. Hey, I'm reading books. I'm going to send this in. I'm going to send in the different definitions. His job was to sort through that all. They said they wanted this book to be about 7,000 pages. They wanted to finish it in 10 years. They began this book in 1879. They didn't get done with it till 1928. This book took almost 40, 50 years. It's supposed to be a 10-year project. But Sir James Murray worked his ass off. He is the professor. Who is the madman? Dr. W.C. Minor. He was a U.S. Army surgeon, retired. But why is he mad? Why does it talk about murder in the title? It talks about murder in the title because this guy killed someone. The doctor, this madman, he kills someone. He killed a guy that he said broke into his house and just shot him right in the street. Intense shit. So he gets put into an insane asylum. And the widow starts, they kind of reconcile things. She understands he's insane. Actually, he's found guilty by reason of insanity, and they put him in the loony bin. They put him specifically in the Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum. He had a med degree. This dude killed someone, and they're saying, how did this guy go so crazy? Well, the widow recognized why he went so crazy, and she would visit him every day, the widow of the guy he killed, and she would give him books because she knew he liked to read books. And he starts reading, and he starts reading, and he starts writing, and he hears about this crowdsourcing thing for the Oxford English Dictionary. He sends in thousands of quotations. So much that the people are all thinking, Jesus, who is this dude that's sending in all these quotations? James Murray, he said specifically, we could illustrate the last 4 centuries from his quotations alone. Well, he has to go meet this guy. So he gets in his vehicle or whatever they have, and he travels over to the Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum. And he meets the madman, Dr. W.C. Minor. This dude is insane. I mean, insane. Literally, it talks a whole chapter about him wrapping floss around his penis and then chopping it off. He did that, and he explains it in the book. It's still insane to me, but he did it. He said it would help him stay away from women or whatever. I'm sure that probably is one way to do it. Well, why did he go insane? What happened to him? Well, he had a peculiar job in the Civil War. They would, whenever they ran out of ideas to punish people, they said, hey, you're a surgeon. You know how to do this properly. Heat this brand up and then take the deserters of the Union Army. We'll hold them down and you brand them properly in the face. He did that and it traumatized him. It left him insane. It left him and led him to kill someone. But ultimately, that kind of surreal path around general medical knowledge led him to writing. This book is like an awesome way to learn about lexicology. If you ever wanted lexicology to be cool, The Professor and the Madman is it. I'm not the only one that thinks that. Mel Gibson bought the rights to this book. Yeah, he bought the rights to this book. He's going to even play the Professor. And then Sean Penn is going to play the Madman, believe it or not. So that'll be interesting. I say stick around for that. It's coming out in 2019, the movie. I encourage you to read the book now, The Professor and the Madman by Mr. Winchester. There's even a Bob Odenkirk plays the Professor, James Murray, in a movie. or in the TV show Drunk History. You can check that out on YouTube. But yes, The Professor and the Madman, that is the good read of the week. We got the banned book of the week. Banned book of the week. We're talking about The Catcher in the Rye. Classic. I had to mention The Catcher in the Rye because any good writer, like myself, you gotta pay homage. Actually, my first book, Freedom Blues and American Soul, was specifically inspired by the idea of The Catcher in the Rye. You just follow kind of this cynical asshole around for a while, and you detail the things that happened to him. Well, the book mentions a sexual scene with a hooker and Maurice. And it talks about seeing the F word. That was kind of a big deal at the time to see the word fuck in a book. And it talks a lot about the preservation of innocence. That's why I say he imagines himself as a catcher, a guy at the end of a rye field, catching kids before they go awry, like before they go out into the world. He wants to preserve their innocence. Well, some teachers recognize the literary value of this book, but some parents didn't. The book got banned. It got banned by everybody. This book between 1961 and 1982 was the most censored book in U.S. high schools. And we're not just talking about till 1982. We jump forward, and in the year 2005, it's still the 10th most challenged book in the United States. If you went to a U.S. high school, you probably read this book. Whatever you think about it, J.D. Salinger created a masterpiece. But people were pissed. That's why I made banned book of the week. A number of other statistics are out there. I mean, this book's been banned up, way, down, way, sideways, all around. It just gets banned like crazy and censored like crazy. And really, it's not even that bad. But I guess some people think it is. And some of those people deal with Robert John Bardo, who killed Rebecca Schaefer. And John Hinckley Jr. tried to kill Ronald Reagan. They both committed these murders or attempted murders because of this book, Catcher in the Rye. And you're saying, well, what about the other one? I'm getting to that. Mark David Chapman. What do you think of him? Probably not a lot if you like the Beatles. He killed John Lennon. They said, why'd you do it? Why'd you kill him, man? And he said, to Holden Caulfield, that's the main character, from Holden Caulfield. That is my statement. So this book inspired the death of John Lennon. Yep. All right. Other obscure things. This week, on the segment we call Other Obscure Things. You see, if you haven't caught on by now, we do different segments. We do the good reads, the banned book of the week, the general overall book, and we talk about other obscure things. This doesn't necessarily have to be about a book. For instance, this week, I did a lot of research on this, and I found an interesting TV show. Yeah, that says Trump. I found a TV show. We try not to get too political in this show, but this is, like, you just got to learn about this. Other obscure things. There's an episode 30 of season 1 in 1958 of Trackdown. Trackdown was a show that went from 1957 to 1958. This episode was called The End of the World. Whatever you think about Trump, he's mentioned in this. In 1958, he's mentioned in The End of the World in the Trackdown Western show. And that's a picture of him right there. And then there's a picture of Trump, like the one we know. Well, this guy, he comes to town and he says, hey, the end of the world is happening. And I got to protect this town, the town in the show. And his name is Walter Trump. No shit. His name is Walter Trump. And they talk about him a lot in the show. They say, how are we going to stop Trump? How are we going to stop Trump? Well, what are Trump's idea for saving the world from this end of the world scenario the TV show produces? He wants to build a wall. I'm not kidding you. He wants to build a wall. Trump wants to build a wall to protect the town from the end of the world. I don't know how more Nostradamus predictive, whatever you can get. But that's a real episode. I had to talk about it. The other obscure things, for some reason, YouTube keeps popping up in all my monologues. And I don't necessarily like you two, but The Irish rock band U2 mentions, they mentioned this show. They didn't want to be overly political, so they mentioned this show by posting it in the background of one of their concerts. And it got people to go out and find out about this. 1958 show about Trump. That is true. I'm not making this shit up. So that's other obscure things. The last segment we have on this show, we call Classic Conspiracy. Don't forget, at the end of the show, we're going to go back and test the Necronomicon. I'm excited. The Classic Conspiracy. Travels with Charlie. Have you ever heard of this book, Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck? In this part of the episode, we kind of talk about, we take real things that happen, and then we ask you, the audience. We say, comment below, let us know what topic you want to choose. I randomly pick a book, and all of these facts are true. You can't disprove anything, but we make a subtle connection. And I challenge you to try to say that this didn't happen. I don't think you can. Post for next week and a comment, but this week we're talking about Travels with Charlie, John Steinbeck, and the Carpenters. Well, let's back up. In the early 1960s, he writes the book Travels with Charlie, where he gets in an old pickup truck, he takes his dog along, and he's just traveling around the country. Well, he goes and he visits a submariner, and he visits so many people. But there's one scene where he talks about Richard Nixon and JFK. He has an intelligent conversation with these people he met. In this book, he details it. There's a lot of controversy about whether this book was fiction or nonfiction. But that aside, Travels with Charlie mentions this conversation about Richard Nixon and JFK. Guess who picks up on that and gets a brilliant idea? The CIA. The CIA picks up on this and says, get John Steinbeck in here. I think we have a picture of John Steinbeck talking to, was it Lyndon B. Johnson at the time? And he says, yeah, we want you to work in the CIA. And he says, I will solicit my services. Just let me know how I can help. And they say, well, we know you travel around. We know your opinion on things. We know you're an American. God knows you're one of the greatest Americans. You're talking grapes of wrath, of mice and men, east of Eden. He says, yeah, I'm about to go to Europe. I'll do a little research. Given the time period, it was relevant, and they needed it. He worked for them for a while, but ends up dying in 1968. And the government solicits a few other people during this time because they say, man, celebrities, that's where it's at. Man, we can get a feel for what's going on with the people. We can learn things that we couldn't otherwise learn from statistics and data books. And eventually they come to the Carpenters. Yeah, we're talking about Karen and Richard Carpenter. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon meets them and says, I would like you to work in the CIA. Well, it didn't end up for Karen very well. There's a picture of Richard Nixon with the other Richard and Karen, and they travel around the country and they're picking up information about how the people are generally feeling about things for the CIA. They're trying to continue this thing that John Steinbeck had started. Well, it doesn't fare very well. If you know anything about the Carpenters, who sing an awesome song that you probably know, says, we've only just begun. But Karen Carpenter, she couldn't deal with the stress of this CIA shit. And she becomes anorexic. You had that picture? Can you put that back up? That picture of what she looked like at the end of her life? Yeah, this killed her. This work with the CIA, it's not for everybody. It wasn't for Karen Carpenter. And she died because of the stress of working for the CIA. Richard, he's still alive, but he suffered stress by dealing with Quaaludes. And he got addicted to him. Karen died. It overall is just not a good thing. Who knows who they're dealing with now? I hear they're dealing with Justin Bieber now, but that's for another story. That's the end of this show, but as I promised, we're going to dive into testing the veracity of the Necronomicon. Next week, we're going to get a little lighter. We're going to talk about Forrest Gump. Not the first book, the second book. Yes, there was a book. They made it into a movie. You know what it is, but The second book they created, Forrest Gump and Company. This follows his travels after the first movie. It's written by the same guy that wrote the first. You're gonna love this. Stay tuned. As always, my name is Knial Piper. I am the writer of Freedom Blues and American Soul and The Demonic Virtue. The Demonic Virtue we produce after every episode on Sundays. I do a chapter of it. You got to tune in and you got to listen to this. Ada for the main character. This just gets intense. And this episode, chapter 4, is awesome. Chapter 5 is even better. You got to stick around for chapter 5. But that aside, as I promised, I said we're gonna check to see how true is the Necronomicon. Well, those faint of heart, I would not listen in. All right. So, how this goes, I read this up. You put the symbol up. And this is a symbol for one of them that specifically grants you different things, and we're gonna try to summon it for this show. It's all in good fun. Who knows what could happen? And then you recite this stuff in here. So I'm gonna do it, and we'll see what happens. We're going to specifically focus on one thing we want. I'm gonna say the success of this show and my writing career. I don't know. All right. Candles lit. Picture up. Here we go. Zi ki ya kan pa, zi I anaka pa, zi di ji kanaka pa, zi di ji anaka pa. Hear me, O thou fourth name of Balarashuku. Come to me by the power of the word of Baladuru and answer my urgent prayer. Ziki anakapa. Zi.